Hello and welcome to That's Not Spit, It's Condensation. I'm Ryan Beach, and today I'm very fortunate to be here with a good friend of mine, Dr. Matt Vangjel, currently an unemployed trumpet player, seeking employment. No, that's not true. Matt just ended his tenure with LSU. How long were you at LSU?
9 years.
9 years, and he will, in the fall, start up at UMKC, which is cool for me. I'm sure you remember this, but you used to talk way back in the day about how much that job would mean to you and how cool that would be if you could possibly get it. And here we are, and you have that job, or you will be starting that job.
Yeah. Crazy things happening. So, yeah.
So this is great.
Been a dream.
Yeah, it's great for Matt, and he's a super knowledgeable teacher. I reach out to him semi-regularly when I have sort of questions that I have that he might be able to shed some light on. So he's been a resource for me. We have a previous podcast episode from kind of like my first year, I think, a long time ago at this point, where we talked about embouchure changes and things like that. And we're going to talk about that again today, because it deserves a bit of an update, and I'm a little bit better at understanding how to structure a thing. So my goal for this episode is going to be to try to lay out sort of a story of embouchure changing, where how do you figure out if you need an embouchure change? What things are you looking for? And when you're making the change, how do you know it's right? And how long do changes take? We're going to try to just give a general look so that someone who is wondering, do I need an embouchure change? You would hopefully have the tools necessary to be able to ascertain whether that's for you or not. So before we get started, I just want to say, Matt, thank you. You're in the process of moving and doing a whole bunch of other things right now. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me for a little bit.
Absolutely. Anything for you, Ryan.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm super happy to share this information. And I do think it is, I think it's something that I'm still surprised that like people will come in and be like, wait, what? I should be playing how? So I'm perfectly happy to spread this information as far and wide as possible.
Well, so I told you we would start differently, but actually what I want to start with now, as you just said, that is why is an embouchure change important, or the idea of an embouchure change? Why does it matter? Why can't someone just pick whatever embouchure that they want, whatever seems to work for them, and just work as hard as they possibly can? Like, why would anyone need to think about an embouchure change at any point?
I think that's a great question. And it's the reason a lot of people don't change embouchures is because potentially there's a student who's not going to be very serious about playing the trumpet. They're coming to get they're going to have a couple years of lessons because they're getting a Bachelor of Arts degree and they want to do something in a recording studio or something like that. And they're like, okay, is this worth the process? Is this worth the turmoil? Is this worth the struggle that this student would go through? But I am just of the mindset that I think anybody who is studying trumpet or playing trumpet that I interact with usually wants to play in some capacity for the rest of their life. And so a lot of the times the physical issues that people have, or like embouchure issues that people may have, will prevent them from doing that, from having that sort of longevity, or it creates a ceiling for them so that, they, whether it's a range thing or an endurance thing or a sound thing or whatever, they're going to have a cap on that. So it's basically just trying to remove all of the obstacles so that there is no ceiling and that the chance of them injuring themselves is, slim to none, hopefully.
Sure. And so for your own experience, I know the answer to this question because we've talked a lot, but if you wouldn't mind sharing with those listening, what is your journey with embouchure changes personally, and then maybe what you've worked with as a teacher?
Is it cool to
you can do whatever you want.
Show you? Okay.
Yeah.
So when I started playing, it's your typical instrument trial night, which is, or day or whatever, where all the kids try things, except it wasn't. They were watching a movie. I remember it was like during band class and nobody was there and they had instruments out on a table. I knew I wanted to play a brass instrument because my brother played trombone, but I didn't want to play the same instrument as him. So I picked up a trumpet and I jammed it in my face and I got like a G above the staff to come out. That was the very first note that I ever played on the trumpet. My flute playing teacher was like, "You should play that instrument." The lights were out. Like the lights were out. They were watching a movie. She just happened to hear me like play a note on the horn. And so it was sort of this like self-discovery thing, which was great. But just to show you, I played with about that much of my upper lip, which is like the tiniest little sliver you can imagine.
Yeah, for those listening and not watching, it almost looks like the mouthpiece isn't even touching the upper lip. It's like completely on the bottom lip.
It is the tiniest, like, dental floss thin sliver of my upper lip in the mouthpiece, which meant, I could play very thin high notes. And got to, everybody's like, "Oh, you're in 7th grade and you could play a C above the staff." And I was like,
yeah, of course.
I'm a champ. I'm amazing. And I played and I made it. And then I had teachers in high school who were like, "You should change your embouchure. You should fix this. This isn't going to get you where you want to go." But my band directors were like, "No, we can't lose the guy who can play the high O's," as a good friend of ours calls them. Like who can play those notes. And so I didn't. And then by the time I was like really serious about going to music school, and I still like was able to make it work for the most part. And like, made all-state band in Virginia and all this stuff. So like, I still felt like I was, on top of my district and all that. And so I felt like I was like, oh, I'm still doing fine, so these people are wrong about my embouchure. But then there were these things that I just thought were normal trumpet player things. Like if I had a heavy day, I basically couldn't really play the next day.
Yeah.
So after those all-state weekends or whatever it was, I was like, by the time the concert rolled around, I was just jamming the horn onto some other part of my face, like with very little upper lip, so I could like squeeze some notes out. And just not thinking, "Oh, this isn't right." Like I had no idea. And then when I went to audition for college, I actually did not get accepted to the place I ended up going, which was James Madison University. And a large part was because they didn't want to have to deal with my embouchure. And so I like changed it over the summer and I went back and I was like, "I'll show you." And I think I pretty much moved it with the help of one of my teachers, moved it to where it was like, just barely inside my upper lip. So I had most of my upper lip in then, but not quite all of it yet. It was still resting inside the like sort of red fleshy part of the lip. And so my teacher at JMU was like, I did an ensemble audition. He was like, "We're going to accept you. You did great work over the summer and we had somebody not show up. So we're going to accept you into the program." And I was like, "Yeah." And then in my very first lesson, he was like, "You did great work over the summer. It's not quite right. So we're going to start you over." And moved it to where it was now. So it was like, I was very fortunate and I recognized the privilege that I had, that I told my parents over that summer before college, I was like, "I have to practice and I have to change my embouchure so that I can go to college and like do this." And so I didn't get a job and I just practiced a lot, like 6 to 8 hours a day. Just, a lot of it just placement stuff and like making sure the mouthpiece was going the right place. And then once I was at school and started over again, I had these responsibilities and I had these obligations, which, so I was then switching back and forth a lot.
Right.
Going, okay, well, when I'm in marching band and I want to play the high O's, I'm going to, or whatever. I even like still used, like I would put the mouthpiece off to the side and put it a little low sometimes when I got tired, and like I could still play like G's above high C, and like had this other embouchure that I was practicing most of the time on. And finally, after about like, it was like December or something like that, I just sounded terrible on every embouchure. And I was just like, winter break came and I was like, "I'm done. I'm just sticking to this new one," because I loved the way I sounded on it.
Sure.
And I love the way it felt. I was like, I'm tired in the right ways, and I could do all the things like flexibility and playing quietly and like all these things that I couldn't do before. were so much better. I just had limited range for a while. So that's sort of my story. And I will say that I've been tweaking and, like assessing and every now and again just tinkering here and there. And I still feel like, I was just talking to one of my colleagues, and he was like, "You have gotten so much better since I got here," which I'm like, that's really cool. That's still happening. And I think some of it is it's not like a major overhaul all the time. It's just like little tinkering and circling back around to common concepts, that sort of thing. So that's been my own experience with it. And then when I started teaching, obviously I wasn't afraid to help students with this, because I was like, I know what you're going through. I know what's frustrating for you. I know what you sound like. And so, like, let me take you through this. And so I'd say probably every year I have a handful of students that I'm like adjusting mouthpieces, like mouthpiece placement, or like how they're using the muscles in their face, or how they're producing sound. I mean, that's like a primary job that I'm really passionate about.
Yeah.
So
that's why I reached out to you, because I do, in some sense, feel, I don't want to say afraid, just not as knowledgeable as I need to have the kind of confidence. Like, I see what's going on. So I think my instincts are getting better, mostly through conversation with you and with some other people. My instincts are getting better that, like, this person, although they can play okay, or they can play well, or they can make things happen, a change would probably be better. And you said something that I think we should touch on and then dive into all of the nitty gritty. But you were saying, like, my sound was better, my flexibility was better. To me, these are all the concepts or the skills that you listed are like almost what I would call conceptual concepts. Like, they're not based on like range and endurance and like tongue speed and stuff. That's like a physical thing that has muscles involved and whatnot. But a lot of times with things like flexibility, soft and loud playing, like a conceptual shift can make a huge difference very quickly. And so I just wonder if you would like to speak to that, of like, when you say those types of things, or you say I've gotten better because I'm constantly tweaking, like what are the skills or the mindset that you have that's keeping you grounded through that process, that helps you know that when I make this tweak and something changes, it's good or not good or whatever, if that makes sense. And if that goes into the next part of the conversation, feel free to just kind of start talking about how you know when it's not right, and we could just get into it.
Sure. I think the things that keep me grounded, and this is where I think all good philosophies for brass playing sort of center on these things that are essentially like, is this the sound that I want? And is this the least amount, and this is my opinion at least, the least amount of work that I need to do to get this sound that I want? Is this the most, people will say efficiency, I think. Is this the most efficient way to get this sound? And so for me, the things that I'm talking about, I could, I'll speak to one thing really specifically, and that was, I was talking about quiet playing. With my old embouchure, I could not play quietly. I could, conceptualize however I wanted. I knew the sound concept that I was going for. I knew what I was trying to sound like. I had my words, that I wanted purity and clarity and like resonance, even at those quiet dynamics. And it was physically impossible for me to do that. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew I always had like air or junk in my sound, or it was really thin and not resonant. Now I know that it's because I basically was fixing the size of my aperture, and it was too big for the size, for the dynamic of sound that I wanted. So there was this excess air. So it's really inefficient excess air passing through my aperture, going in through my sound, rather than it just being like that pure vibration. And as far as flexibility goes, it was a similar issue. As I've gone into, studying like the musculature of the face, and like essentially how we most naturally would create faster airspeed, and, or slower airspeed, that sort of thing, and how we move between those things, there has to be some flexibility within. within the mouthpiece with the size and like firmness of your aperture. It's not all just an air and tongue thing. It's all of those things sort of in conjunction. But if you're jamming the horn into your face and using this much of your upper lip and keeping your aperture at a fixed size, you have it's a struggle, and you can't really navigate that very well.
So you just said it's sort of rooted in, am I getting the sound that I like, and is this the easiest, or is it easy to, because it's sometimes impossible to know, is this the easiest, right, on a
Right.
spectrum, but is it
Yes.
easy or is it getting easier? Okay, I'm going to use this as a segue into the conversation. What if you have a student where you're like, I think you should change your embouchure, and they say, I like the way that I sound. So you're listening to them and saying you could sound better, but the student is saying, well, I like the way I sound, so why does it matter? Like, what is your way to broach this discussion, to be able to help them to understand why it will be valuable for them? And then, of course, there are students who will then say, like, I am not happy with what's going on, and they're more likely to embrace an embouchure change. But maybe we could do the antagonist kind of example as a way
Yeah.
that you would start talking about, this is like, these are the types of things that I say. This is the way that I broach this subject, so that I can help people understand like where I'm coming from and where they could be if they embraced what I want to do with them.
Yeah, so I haven't, in all honesty, I haven't come across too much of that with students that like know me and trust me. And
Okay.
so like I think there's this level of trust that you have to establish. I mean, with any student, period, right? There's this level of trust where they feel safe and they know you're looking out for their best interests, and they trust that you are in the business and you're doing the thing at a high enough level that you know what you're talking about. So generally I haven't really had that issue most of the time, because I don't, when somebody walks in for their first lesson, I'm not usually like, we need to change your embouchure.
Sure.
You know, or I do back when they're in high school. Like, you know, I generally have a lot of contact with the high school students in the state, and I'll see them at festivals or camps or whatever, or they'll have little lessons through their things. And I just say, hey, here's a thing to think about. And the main thing that I do is I say, here, you play this. Like, you play this little excerpt that you're just working on, that you're playing, and I record it for them. And then I play it back, you know, then I play it back for them and they listen. And I play it. And then I like allow them to record that, and I'm like playing back and forth, and I just say, okay, so which one, you know, do you think sounds better? But yeah, a lot of times it's just sort of like they hear the way it could sound through my demonstration, and they're like, or sometimes it's even a demonstration of a one of my students. You know, they'll be like a freshman and they'll hear some senior and they'll say, how do I end up sounding like that? I'm like, well, we had to tweak this thing, and, you know, and you have a similar issue. And, but a lot of it is just sort of evaluating and building trust, and then slowly introducing the idea of it. I think, you know, multiple times throughout that first semester, saying, you know, this is a thing that would get easier if we did this. And then and I continually come back to it and say, you know, let me know when you're ready, or when you decide you want to do this. And sometimes people don't ever want to do it. And I say, fine.
Mm.
You know, I say, I'm like, okay, if you don't ever want to do it and you don't ever want to change it, because they're like, I don't care to play much after I'm done here, or, you know, or they're high school students and they're going to go on and do something else. Cause I try to do it as early as possible.
Sure.
You know, if I can get somebody as a freshman or set somebody up in the right way, like, then they just don't have those obstacles and they end up going a lot further, and a lot easier, which, you know, blessing and a curse sometimes. But
Yeah. So I think, I mean, that is super helpful, and it's great to hear that it's something that you, yeah, like you said, you're not just diving in. You're like,
yeah,
after I've established some trust and I want the students' feedback, because you want them on board, because
yes,
my assumption is if they're not on board, they're not going to do the things necessary, and you might as well not even do it. Another part of the question, then, to get a little bit more specific, is what are the, and you spoke to it earlier, but just to make it a very clear answer, what are the upsides, basically? Like when you're talking and you're saying, if we changed your embouchure, here are the things that would get better, or you would be able to do, or down the road, this and that. This is what this, if you don't do it, this is what you'll experience. And if you do it, hopefully this is what you'll experience. Can you kind of walk through the upsides of an embouchure change? Every student's different. Just try to generalize. I know.
Sure. Yeah, and you're right. Like every student is different. And if there's something that's set up that's like somebody says, I want to play in an orchestra, then I'm like, your sound is not, a lot of times I can just say your just general sound concept, and then we work on concept for a while and blah, blah, blah. But the upsides are generally you will be able to produce a like more resonant sound through all ranges and through all dynamics. That's the one that gets most people, is that they either really struggle playing quietly or really struggle to play loudly. And depending on what their setup is, sometimes you have, very rarely this happens where a student is like, has their mouthpiece too high on their upper lip, but occasionally I'll get that. But almost everybody that comes in, it's not even like a left to right thing, side to side thing. It's an up and down thing. And so a lot of those issues end up being the same, which is you can't get a clear, pure sound when you're playing quietly. You can't consistently produce sound, depending on the heaviness of your days, which, obviously that's going to improve your endurance if you're actually making yourself tired in the right way. You're going to be able to have more control of your sound. You're going to have increased flexibility, and you'll have more. The thing that I push the most is that they'll be able to have be more versatile, have more control over their just sound in general. So if they want to change their sound, if they want to go and do something that's more commercial, lead, jazz, funk, whatever, we can do that. And we then can just use equipment to do that rather than I'm just going to use a crap ton of pressure and plaster my tongue to the roof of my mouth, and then I'm going to get the right sound. So we go through it. We go through it that way. And ultimately, once we start the process, usually a lot of times I say, let's just mess around with it. Let's just try it for a second and see what happens. And a lot of the times just getting that first buzz when they do get it on the new set, they go, it's this moment where they go, I had no idea that it could be that easy to make this sound. To make a sound on this instrument, because most of the time they've been struggling really hard, and and the direction that you get is just put more air through, blow more air, blow more air, blow more air. And all that does for somebody with very little upper lip in the mouthpiece is just bah, puts more air in the sound. So then they only sound good when they're playing really loudly, because that's when it's actually a little bit balanced, but between air and aperture size and stuff. But sorry, not to get into specifics or anything.
No,
but
it's great. Do you ever do an appeal to authority and say can you find me one professional player whose embouchure looks like yours? Do you ever do that kind of? Because
absolutely,
pretty much
absolutely.
all professionals that I've seen have a balanced embouchure, and
Yep.
if they have control, anybody that has control you're talking about has that kind of embouchure. I was just curious if you ever say if you could find me one person, but it's basically impossible to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we do a lot of. And I'll say, and that's I sort of do with all my students, which is basically just we sort of geek out for the first little bit. And I'm like, what did you find? Did you find a video? Here's a video I found. Look at this person's face, or whatever. Listen to this sound this person's making and look at how effortless it is and all this stuff. I also have some quotes on my wall usually that are they're 3 or 4 or 5 of them that are talking about essentially what your setup should feel like or what it should look like or whatever. And so, yeah, absolutely. I'm what are the commonalities here from all these people? And yeah, and it's pretty crazy. But this is why you have to find the people without beards. It's so hard to see somebody's face when they got beards, but
Well, let's dive in.
Yeah.
I this for me it's great to get this very global perspective on embouchure changes and why it's important and what the upsides are. But I kind of want to try my best to pull out of you some specifics. So you already
Sure.
mentioned it a second ago, so it's a good place to start. What are some signs when you're watching someone that you begin to think this person could need an embouchure change?
So the first is usually there's something in their like sound. Um and that's like, and it's not like my first listen of them, right? This is the very first thing that I do is, like try to remove like as much tension as possible from people and get them breathing the right way, so that you're, at least a more effective way, so that they're then, and not such a tense way. Usually that's what I'm having to do, is like back that off. And so then once I remove that and I can still hear, okay, can you find this? And then, we'll deal with some intonation and some centering things and see like, okay, can we find this like best part of this note? And usually like, they won't be able to find it, either at a normal dynamic, or they may be able to find it at like a louder dynamic. But then as we start to bring it down, then they're like not able to do it. But that's so I usually always try to see, okay, how far can we get here first? But there are some cases where I immediately will look at someone and just seeing their face and seeing how, like, where their mouthpiece is placed. I'm like, I know. It's usually when they look like I did.
Sure.
When it's like that far down, or like in a really crazy spot. Not, I shouldn't say crazy spot, but like an unconventional spot. And again, it's not necessarily a left to right thing. Like there are a whole bunch of things that can go into that, but an up and down, like north and south sort of thing. The vertical, that's usually when I'll just be like, hey, can you do these couple things? And then I'll ask them those same questions. I say, how do you feel after a heavy day? Like, can you produce sound normally? How do you like do some flexibility for me? And usually that's when you get the, like, well, they're trying to change partials. They're just like engaging their throat a ton. And then I'll get them to play like a chromatic scale up and down, that sort of thing, and just to check out range. And, range is the most like ambiguous one, because like depending on their setup, they may have amazing, really great upper register. But again, for me, I'm saying, what kind of sound do we want? And if there is no resonance to the sound, then to me, I'm like, that's not a characteristic sound of the trumpet. And so I generally say, well, what do you think of when I do that? Like, or when this person plays, can you sound like that? Do you sound like that? Do you try to sound like that? And usually people are coming in with the right idea about how they want to sound, but they are usually saying, I just can't figure out how to do that. So that's usually like how it sort of goes down.
So, in an extreme scenario, to ask this question, so I'll have a follow-up comment. If someone could play trumpet like on the corner of their mouth, and they could play exactly like you, would you mess with it?
It would,
like, if there was no, if it looked unconventional, but they were able to produce the great sound and the range, and they could play quiet. Like, because it's the reason I'm asking this question, and maybe I'll frame it and then have you respond. But
sure,
because it's interesting that you would start with the sound as like like you said, if someone's just like completely unconventional, like over here on the corner, I'm going to mess with it. But likely they wouldn't be able to do. You get the hypothetical nature of my question. But
yeah.
it's just interesting to start with the sound, because that's like where all things on the trumpet start with to begin with. And then you're saying, okay, here are these characteristics of their sound or of their playing. And then we would, if you look at practice as a problem solution dynamic, like sometimes the solution is not to change the embouchure, it's to keep moving the air. So it's interesting. You almost have like a diagnostic checklist that you would go through. And then if those types of things don't necessarily make it better, you're like, okay, well, another thing we can try, another tool we can almost thinking about an embouchure change as a tool to solve a problem rather than like some sort of, if that makes sense. Like to me, it almost shifts mentally into like, this is less of like I'm bad and like my trumpet playing is horrible. And oh, this is just the thing I need to do to fix this problem.
Yeah, and I think I think about it that way, and that this might be something that has changed since the last time we talked. Whatever it was, like was it 10 years, 10 years ago, something like that? I don't know.
It was like 5, but maybe it feels
what?
like
No, no, it was like my first year here, wasn't it?
No. I mean, I started my
anyway.
podcast in 2019, so it couldn't have been sooner than that.
Whatever. No. Anyway, feels like forever ago. But anyway, see, this is, I think, this is one way that I may have changed, I think, even since then. And, and that's like a shift in my teaching just to make it not seem like it's such a scary thing. And that it is, it is something that you may always just be like I said, like tinkering with and toying with and just circling back around saying, well, can I do this thing a little bit better? Can I do this thing a little bit better? But yeah, it is. So I think of it, it is usually a combination of those things, right? Like it is, yes, all things start with sound, of course. Most students, they're usually like by week 3, they're like, okay, let's do it. But I have like, even just this year had somebody who it took them the entire year, and they finally were like, yeah, okay, let's get to it. But yeah, it is very much like, okay, if somebody, I'm gonna try to answer your hypothetical question. If somebody came in and like was playing on the corner of their mouth and they sounded like a professional trumpet player and everything was clear and they were like, it's super easy for me to play this way, then I would probably try to seek out a couple of people for a few reasons. And typically it's because if somebody's playing that extremely, chances are they're not using all of the muscles that we would use. And so their chance of injuring themselves by overusing the muscles on one side of their face is much, much greater than if they have it sort of a little bit more balanced. There are people who play slightly off to the side, but when you watch them play, you can see that they have like support on both sides of their face. And so for me, it's looking at that. A lot of times when I had students playing off to the side, they're like really firmly pulling one direction. And if you're pulling one direction, that you're going to injure yourself at some point. And so if it's like really balanced all the way around on both sides and it's just slightly off to the side, there are plenty of people who play like that and have very, very successful careers and, are great trumpet players.
Yeah, that's an interesting answer. So you're saying that sound is kind of one of the main drivers, but there are physical reasons to have the embouchure in the right place too. So that kind of just takes us into the next part of the conversation where I think so. We should do it from both angles then. Let's talk about a good embouchure. Let's talk about what it looks like how it's set up. And you feel free to use the mouthpiece to demonstrate as much as you want. And then also, what will the effect of that be? You've covered a little bit, but just to get it all in the same place, what will the effect of a good embouchure be? Or what can you expect, I guess, if you put the mouthpiece in, quote, the right place, and then you have good, healthy airflow and all that? What kinds of things should you be able to expect with that setup?
Sure. Like I said, I think most people are surprised when they see how easily like a sound can happen on the trumpet when they do get that good setup. But so there have been, oh my gosh, and this is where a lot of this sort of gets really murky maybe a little bit, because for a long time we talked about, if you go back and you read, I think it's in the Clark book and it's in the Arbin book, and they say, it should be 1/3 upper lip, 2/3 lower lip, which is, I think, a little bit, I think it's a little bit problematic for a number of reasons. And like, I have my thoughts and theories about it, but I just, depending on the size of somebody's lips or something like that. And when people think they're putting it at a particular ratio, Like most people be like, I do it about like 60-40 or 50-50 or whatever. And it's like, if we were to actually measure, like that's probably not what they're doing, And so I sort of try to avoid those. And so one of the things that I think people are saying nowadays, which I think is much more healthy, and there's a really good just picture and description in Fritz Damrow's book, Fitness for Brass. And it just has a little picture, and it's like the mouthpiece should be, again, on the top, and the bottom should be outside of the red, fleshy part of the lips. But I mean, there are a lot of people who have talked about that. I mean, there's a video of Winton telling somebody, it needs to be outside the red of your lip, and he's one who's super close to it. He's like a little bit lower. But again, I think these are all things that, or these are all people who I trust and who operate the instrument really, really, really well.
He's doing okay.
he's doing fine.
Sure.
But if you look at people, even on the other side of things, I've heard it from Wayne Bergeron, and if you watch videos of Lewis Dowdeswell or Doc Severinsen or whatever, you see the ring is like pretty much in that same place for everybody. So anyway, so that's sort of what I try to go for, and so a lot of times it's placing like one lip at a time and finding it. For me, I always have to place my upper lip first because that's the one that I used to cheat all the time and like want to move down. And then I just find my lower lip in there. So if you're able to see.
Yeah. So for our audio listeners,
yeah,
he just described it, but he's sort of setting the top lip first and then getting the fleshy part of the bottom lip in there. So it's not like I'm sure you feel like now you have a set or a groove that you find, but it's still interesting. Yep. You're probably still cognizant of getting that top lip in there first, just to make sure even all this time later, you're thinking about that fix. It sounds like to me.
I've set up this routine for myself. So this is a habit of mine that I still place. It's not as noticeable, but I still place my top lip first, and it happens much, much faster. And even, there are times where I'll go through periods where I'm like, oh, in this practice session, I'm going to place my lower lip first and, try things that way. And it just feels weird,
Yeah.
It feels very, very strange. So that part of the routine is good for me. That habit is good for me. And it allows me, I tell my students this all the time. I say, if you want to be consistent, you have to be consistent. You have to do things consistently, right? So, if I'm placing the mouthpiece the same way every single time, which is crucial when you're changing an embouchure, but also, outside of that as well. So anyway, my whole approach to changing embouchures is essentially like, how does my body create the right airspeed necessary to, like, once I put the mouthpiece up, it gets the note I want, right? Like, and so I, think about this, and this was something that my Keith Benjamin said to me at UMKC. He was like, every note has an airspeed, and he just sort of like tossed it out, like, oh, whatever. And I was like, well, and then my body should be able to produce this airspeed for any note. Like, I want to produce that in the most natural way. So if I do that and then place the mouthpiece, theoretically, I'm going to find the right balance of like what my body needs to do and like, like matching the sort of the resistance of the horn to get the note that I want. And so a lot of times when I'm placing things, I have people play, I'm like, just blow the air that you think you would need for, let's say an F, in the staff, and they end up, and if that looks weird, if they're, doing weird things with their face, then I'm just like, nope. And we go back we go back and forth in the mirror a lot until they're basically just like, face at rest. What's the most natural way that you would blow air if you were not a trumpet player? And I'm so glad I can do this on here now, because, if you think, I have a toddler, and when she blows air, she goes, and her cheeks puff out, and but if you look at my lips, they get really small and they get really focused. And so I'm like, so if I were to blow really fast air, then that's what my body would do naturally, right?
Yeah.
It's just, So then, in order for me to have sort of that flat plane and not be over puckered, if I just sort of keep my cheeks in, then it gives me this really cool, like perfect trumpet embouchure.
That's crazy that you figured that out.
Setup that like, and like I barely touch the horn to my face, and have the mouthpiece, like essentially my lips in the mouthpiece, barely touch to my face, and it wants to vibrate.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the main thing that I go for when I'm setting people up, is like, I will place their mouthpiece. I do all kinds of things. Like, I just have them blow, and I'll place it over on the side of their mouth. I'll place it here. I'll place it way up here, all around. And then there's usually a place that's kind of in the center. I'm trying to like center the basically the hole in the mouthpiece over the hole in their lips, and get both their lips in. And there's a place where, like, as soon as you make that contact and create the seal, that like the buzz starts to happen, and they usually jump or freak out when that happens.
That's very cool. Like, got so much more than I like. That's some of the things stuff I've never thought about. And it's cool. I like that idea that like you could take this thing, like when you just blow air and your cheeks puff out, you can use that as a way to, because I've always heard like make an M and blow, but the air may not be like what it needs to be, or it could be too tight or whatever, like you just did.
Yeah.
So
and a lot of people over roll in or over roll out when you say M. I found that to be kind of problematic.
Yeah.
It still works for some people though. Like, still does. Totally.
Yeah. But like, I feel like what you just did could be a slightly more universal than that, because like you'll probably come at it a very similar way. So if I were to summarize, just to make sure I understand, and a proper embouchure, ideally speaking, what you want is just the top lip and the bottom lip, the fleshy parts inside the mouthpiece. You don't want the like sort of where the groove sits on the mouthpiece to be on the red part. My understanding for this, you didn't cover this, but my understanding is that as you begin to press and put pressure on that, it just could affect the buzz. It could make it so the buzz stops, and then you're running out of like free moving air and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, and also if it is in the lips, then it's essentially just resting on tissue and not on muscle. If it is above the lips, then it's resting on muscle, and your tissue is free to vibrate. The problem when you are resting on tissue is that all it is like punching yourself in the face. So your lips get more and more swollen, and your response gets worse and worse. And so if you're resting on the muscle, then you're actually, you can give a little bit more pressure when you need to, when you get up in the upper register, that sort of thing, without as much like swelling. Plus, you'll be tired from, holding your aperture small at the end of the day, essentially, and your muscles will be tired. And it's that right kind of tired, right kind of soreness. Most of the time, I should have said this. This is the other question that I ask when somebody has a low mouthpiece. Is I'm like, when you get tired, where do you get tired? And what does it feel like? So that should be another thing that, I should have said earlier, is that like, if they're experiencing pain, like that should be an obvious cue, right? Like if there's something that hurts, or if when they're tired, they're always tired, they'll point to the middle of their lips and they'll say right here, right in the middle of their lips, the fleshy part of their lips. They're like, and then it just feels like I just can't get a sound to start anymore. So that's probably like the biggest indicator that they're just using a lot of pressure, and that it's too low. And I just want to clarify, I always try to say, like, I point out the inside rim. It's not the outside rim of the mouthpiece that we want outside of the red. It's the inside rim of the mouthpiece. And everybody will say when they go to that, they're like, oh, but my lips feel so close together and I feel like I can't push air through. And I'm like, that's a little bit of a shift that usually needs to happen, because they're so used to having this giant aperture, and it is now like a fraction of the size. And so that'll be one of the big struggles, is like having them retrain how to meet the resistance of the instrument with this smaller and the resistance from a smaller aperture in their lips, and not like, and eventually when they stop feeling like they have to force so much. They're like, oh,
yeah.
I
It's like
don't have
learning.
to do this.
It's interesting. It's like you're describing that it's not just like putting the mouthpiece in a different spot and learning getting used to that feeling, but you're almost like relearning how you move air and the balance and everything. So getting the trumpet on the either side of the inside rim of the mouthpiece on either side of the lip. And then you also describe that process of sort of just blowing fast air and then letting your cheeks puff out and then sort of bringing them in, but holding the embouchure gets like the right kind of air speed, or at least an excited, energized air speed.
Yeah.
And if I'm not incorrect, I'm head of the question. If we can get these two components to work together, my understanding is you should be able to expect a much more resonant, sort of full, beautiful, professional sound immediately if you're doing it right.
Yeah. And even if it's not, it may not, they may not have the balance of the speed of the air, right? Or like, in relation to how firmly they're holding their aperture or how big their aperture is. They may not have the balance right away, but what they'll notice is the ease of response
Okay.
first. That's probably first. They'll notice ease of response and usually clarity. And like, I always start on the lead pipe rather than the mouthpiece or the full trumpet when I'm doing this with people. And it's just so that they can find that like really good buzzy lead pipe sound. And I don't really care what note they start on, just so long as it's sort of effortless response. And then we work on, okay, let's let the air be a little bit faster, like give it a little more gas, whatever it is. And then we'll eventually get to, like whatever the horn is, usually a concert E flat, and like, we'll get there and we'll spend a little bit of time there just getting that really, really effortlessly and practicing the placement of it and all that stuff. But a lot of the time, there's a lot that goes into that process as well. So like I usually will start them like, depending on the student, some people it works better for them to, blow and then stop and then place. Some people it works better to blow and place while they're blowing. Some people I have them go, blow, place, stop, breathe through your nose, and then play. So there are a lot of different variables or there are a lot of different ways that you can do this that will be effective. Can I throw in one other little tool that I use?
Of course, that's why we're doing this.
Great. So I learned this from my wife Jenna, who learned it from Andrew Bain, who is principal horn in the LA Phil. He's okay, fine high brass player.
Yeah.
But I learned it from him, and then I saw that it's actually in Fritz Stammerow's book as well. But he uses it as like a breath control exercise. But it's another way that you can find sort of a smaller set if you're used to, instead of puffing your cheeks and doing that thing. You can also just leave your face at rest, put the back end of the mouthpiece just in your lips like a straw, like not past your teeth or anything like that. And then you just blow through that. And you don't try to be a trumpet player about it, but don't let the air escape anywhere except through the mouthpiece. And he does this, or Andrew did this with Jenna for a number of different reasons, but I think it works great for setting up just like a really efficient and smaller aperture. And then you can just pull it out. And you allow it to close down rather than, this will be a place where a lot of people struggle, is they'll go, but you hold the shape, you hold the support. So often I have students with an extra mouthpiece. So they'll have the horn with a lead pipe out in one hand, or I'll be holding that and I'll place it for them. And they do that, and then we place the lead pipe over that, and that like will a lot of the times just get it to be the right sound. If it's not the right sound, it's usually just their air's not fast enough. And so I say, okay, when you pull the mouthpiece out, let the air be a little bit faster. We place again, and through that, however many times it takes, we usually get through that process and get to a place where it's like a really effortless response and a really good buzzy sound.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That's actually really helpful. I wanted to cover at least 2 more questions, and then any comments you have, and we can just like mash them into one. But one question is, how long could someone expect an embouchure to sort of take hold, or what? Maybe a better way to say it is sort of what milestones could they expect to hit after one day, after a week, after a month? Because like different things are going to come at different times. And then the other question is along this way, what are some things that students or people who are engaging with embouchure changes, what are some things that they can do to help maximize how well the embouchure change takes, if that makes sense?
Sure. Okay. So I think the first thing I may go a little bit backwards on
Sure.
this, if that's
Whatever you
okay. Uh, you have to have a mirror, like, and one that can be close enough to your face so that you can see, because at the beginning, especially for probably the first like month or so, and depending on how many days of that month you play, which I will just tell you, it is way, way, way easier to get through an embouchure change if you are playing daily, period. And, does that mean you can't take a week, a day off, once a month or a couple, every couple of weeks or something? No, of course not. But you can do that. But just know that, especially early days, if you remember, if you've ever taught like beginners, when they take a day off, it's like the next time they come back, it's like starting over again sometimes. Or if they take a weekend off, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
They're like, which end do I blow in? So anyway, but for that first month, like playing like daily, and it maybe doesn't even have to be playing necessarily, but it could just be like placing the mouthpiece, but having a mirror really close. I also, when I'm in lessons with people, I take videos and I take pictures, and I say, this is what it should look like. This from this side, from this side, from this side, like from both sides and the front. Like, this is what this should look like, and make sure and then while we have it in the right set and they're getting the right feeling, I'm saying, okay, write down in your notebook, or we say it for the recording, like, what does this feel like to you? Like, describe how this set feels to you, so that they're getting that. And then we're also taking a recording, like I said, of what it sounds like when they're getting that buzz. So the more you can have that like goal of, this is what this should sound like, especially in the beginning, I think that's, and then you have those references of, this is what it should look like, this is what it should feel like, that you can go back to. That's going to help you get through the process a lot faster. And then your mindset needs to be not, when will I be as good as I was? It cannot be that. It has to be, I'm going to try to get better every day. That's it. I'm just going to try to get a little bit better every day. That's it. And or a little bit more comfortable with this set every day. If you are constantly focusing on, well, I'm not as good as I was, I'm not as good as I was, I'm not as good, that's when doubt comes in, and that's when you stop putting in the time and stop putting in the effort. So I always like to change my students' mindset and say that on day one, they're the best trumpet player they've ever been, because previously they were working on a dysfunctional embouchure that was heading towards disaster or injury or the end of their career. On day one of your embouchure change, you are the best trumpet player you've ever been. And if you can continue to do work that way,
every day you're the best trumpet player, every single day.
I feel like that even right now. I am even on my not so great days, I am still I am still the best trumpet player that I've ever been in my life. And I think holding that there and saying, I'm the best that I've ever been, and I can get a little bit better today. Like that's just a really positive sort of growth mindset that allows you to like continue to want to do the work instead of like, I'm not as good as I was. I can't play like this person. I can't play this note yet. I can't play whatever. I think just doing this, especially later on in your life, the older you are, the more baggage there is there, and the more the expectation of you is there every day, saying you need to be here, you need to be here, you need to be here. You don't have this much time left, which is why I try to do it as early as possible when they don't even know, and then they're usually a little bit more like having fun with it rather than I must.
Sure.
I must get better. So that mindset is really crucial and key. The other thing that will help them is that if you keep this mindset and if you keep consistent practice, then yes, after a month, you're going to feel more comfortable and you're going to be able to play. Again, it depends on how drastic the change is, but your range will generally, like usually within a week, maybe 2 weeks. Like, students can play from like C in the staff down to like low F sharp. So you've got that whole range. And the other sort of mindset thing that I say is sound like a professional, get your ideal sound concept on every note that you can play, and then we push our outer limits in a healthy way. But I can practice articulation. I can practice flexibility. I can practice multiple tonguing. I can practice playing beautiful vocalises. I can practice transposition. I can practice sight reading. I can do all of those things in this range that I can play, and like making sure that I sound like whoever your sound model is on whatever thing you're playing. I remember when I was going through it, I was going, okay, I was really listening to like Phil Smith's excerpt CD, I think, at that time, which,
it's a good model.
Yeah. Right. And I was just like, this is what I want to sound like when I do this. And, I think that was the sound that I was giving myself and saying, nope, what would he sound like? What would he sound like? And I think that was like tremendously, tremendously helpful. I would say, going back to the first part of your question, again, it depends on the student. Very interestingly, my students who play jazz tend to feel more comfortable faster. And I think it's because of the sort of the nature of what it is that they're playing. Like, they improvise a lot. So they'll just be like, well, I can play in this range. Okay, so I can play in this range. I'm going to play whatever, 4 choruses of this solo, or of this tune. And like, they'll have the horn on their face for like however many minutes. So they build up good endurance really pretty quickly doing that. If you're not used to doing that and that's not your thing, like you also need to like, listen to your body, I think. But I would say in general, I've had students usually in, I would say like the 3 to 5 month range, they're able to get to like basically G or A above the staff, like, and then, all through the range and feel great playing those things, like, and get the sound that they want. And usually it's within, and again, it happens faster for some. I've definitely had some that did it faster, but usually it's about a year-ish, and then people are like beyond the range that they could play before.
Sure.
But it is that sort of, it does take that time. And it feels like, just like anything, you get that first octave pretty quickly, but that, like, the second octave comes a little bit more slowly once you get through that. So, but then sound, articulation, flexibility, dynamics, all of that stuff is like within that first month is better.
Yeah,
is better.
It's an interesting. I mean, after I make this comment, I'd love just for some closing thoughts from you, but it's interesting when you say like it'll take like a year and then the range will be beyond like what it was before, because that sounds like such a long time. But if you extend, if you're someone who's serious and you're like, I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life or whatever, let's just take a 10-year period of time. If it's like, if you took the first year and you basically were like, I'm going to back up and I'm going to like do this right. And after a year, my range is better. I'm basically better than where I was before. And then you just maintain those habits for the next 9 years. It's like you're going to be in, at the beginning, it looks like I'm barely further than I was a year ago. But 10 years from that point, you're going to be in two completely different places. The exponential curve idea. You're going to be in such a different place. And so I think that's, to me, that would also be an important mindset to keep in mind, that you're not just investing in like this moment right now. Can I sound better? You're investing in who you're going to be 10 years from now, and the idea that you're going to be in a very different place if you take this time right now seriously.
Yeah, I would say probably, I mean, it took me longer than that.
Yeah.
But there were things I didn't know, and there were things that I wasn't catching, and there were things that I wasn't being deliberate enough about. I mean, I would have these moments where things worked really great, and I all of a sudden could play, like F's above, the staff. And I was like, as a sophomore in college, like, a year after an embouchure change, I was like, oh, I have this note. Why do I have this note?
Yeah.
But I didn't know what was happening. And my last, or one of my last thoughts about this is that the danger when you're going through this, if you're not consistently placing, and is that you will do something that's sort of in between. You'll find something that works a little bit better and is a little bit more comfortable, that feels a little bit more like the way you used to play. And, I think that is, at times it seems like it's a good solution in the moment. And sometimes it is the right thing. It's the thing that needs to happen for somebody. But for me, it ended up taking me, I would say, it took me a lot longer to get through, because I was still doing some of the like bad habit things that I was doing on my old embouchure. Like for me specifically, I had, I placed my mouthpiece so low. I was so used to, when I wanted to play higher, I'd just tuck my lower lip further and further in my mouth. And so even after changing my embouchure and changing my mouthpiece placement, I was still, as I would go higher, collapsing my lower lip. And that was a thing that I didn't really think about. I didn't really know about.
Yeah.
And so it's like making sure that your old habits don't dictate how your new embouchure works is really, really important.
Well, I think, yeah, for sure. That's why I was so interested in trying to get like sort of as much, again, it's all general. Like if you want what Matt actually would say about your embouchure, like I'm going to get his contact information in just a second here. But what we're talking about in general ideas here is like, it's still trying to get the sort of, a lot of people are going to start in a very, at least with the same similar, I'm imagining what you've described as you have a similar conversation at the beginning. You're trying similar things at the beginning. And then the hard part is once you get someone set up, it's like the hard part becomes how do we help you stay consistent with it? And that I think having like a coach or a teacher or whatever is pretty invaluable. But I hope that this resource that Matt has so generously created helps. If you're listening to this and you are identifying with some of what Matt is describing as some of the issues you're experiencing, I hope it gives you some actionable things that you can try. And then if anybody has any questions, what will be a good way for them to reach out and talk to you, Matt?
The easiest way right now is through just my Gmail address, which is matthew.vangjel@gmail.com, or sending me a message on like Facebook or Instagram, something like that.
I think, like I said at the beginning of this episode, beyond embouchure changes and his wealth of expertise there, I really respect Matt as a pedagogue and a player, and I think there's a lot more there. And so if you're interested in hearing from him and just have questions in general or specifically about embouchure changes, he's always been gracious to me and helping out. I imagine he'll be gracious to you. And I'm excited for you to this next step at UMKC and everything that'll come. And I just want to, thank you for your time today, Matt. This is, for me, this is really helpful. And I'm sure for anyone listening, it's going to be helpful too.
Awesome. Thanks for putting it together, Ryan.
Well,
and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I also want to just take a second to thank Brandon Yoakum for his work on mastering this episode of the podcast. You can check out Brandon at epiphanyrecordingstudio.com. And most of all, I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.